dark roads, feel the trickle in your clothes, blow the dust cake from your nose, hear the tractor's steady roar. Oh, you can't stop now, there's a quarter section more or less to go. And it figures that the rain keeps its own sweet time. You can watch it come for miles, but you guess you've got a while, so ease the throttle out of here. Memory rots again, and there's victory in every quarter mile. Poor old cruising down the road, the heartache, hail, and hoppers brought him down. He gave it up and went to town. And Evan Pierce the other day took a heart attack and died at 42. You can see it coming on, 'cause he worked as hard as you. In an hour, maybe more, you'll be wet, clear through. The air is cooler now. Pull your handprint further down and watch the field behind the plow. Turn to straight, dark roads. Put another season's promise in the ground. And if the harvest's any good, money just might cover all the loans. You mortgaged all you own. Buy the kids a winter coat. Take the wife back east for Christmas if you can. All summer she hangs on when you're so tied to the land. For the good times come and go, but at least there's rain. This won't be barren ground when September rolls around. So watch the field behind the plow. Turn to straight, dark roads. Put another season's promise in the ground. Want to try it a bit? Watch the field behind the plow. Turn to straight, dark roads. Put another season's promise in the ground. That's great.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to the stream. Tonight, I'm going to be discussing the question, was Ted Kaczynski a psyop? And within this question, there are basically two schools of thought, I suppose you could say. One is that of Michael Hoffman. Michael Hoffman was... I forgot to pull his page up. Michael Hoffman was the author of numerous conspiracy theory books. He's called by Wikipedia a big H denier and an anti-Semite. And he essentially believes that Kaczynski was a scapegoat, essentially. And the other school of thought, posited by Miles Mathis, is that Kaczynski was just straight up an actor, an agent, intentionally carrying out the will of the powers that be. But I think what both of these schools of thought agree on is that the purpose of such a psyop would be, broadly speaking, to blackwash the ideas presented by Kaczynski. That many of the ideas presented by Kaczynski were dangerous to the establishment, and that by creating a quote-unquote domestic terrorist and putting these ideas into his mind, having his mouth be that which communicates these ideas to the broad public, that these ideas would be effectively blackwashed, and that, if you ever express an idea that parallels those of Kaczynski, anybody who is aware of the Unabomber would associate you with him and therefore consider you a kook. Oh, your ideas, you sound like Ted Kaczynski, therefore you're crazy, therefore we can dismiss the ideas immediately. And I agree with that. I personally lean more toward Michael Hoffman's take on the issue. But tonight I'm going to be going through a number of facts unearthed by Miles Mathis in his article here. Even though I disagree with his basic conclusion, his thesis that Kaczynski was an intentional, knowing actor playing a role for the cryptocracy. I disagree with that. But regardless, I think he brings up a lot of interesting facts, and so we're going to explore some of these facts. We're going to look into the lore of Ted Kaczynski. Just looking at the chat for a moment. Didymus, glad to see you here. You were very punctual on this live stream. I appreciate that. Loki Death says, he is so heavily promoted by alt circles. Well, that's in some ways that's true. In other ways, there's a lot of people who like to push back against Kaczynski's ideas. There's certainly no consensus within alt circles about Kaczynski. Didymus also says, I heard several times he was an early victim of some troon psyop, but I never looked into it. Could you comment on that issue? Yes, we're going to be talking about that issue. We're going to be going through some of the deep lore of Kaczynski, and his involvement in an MK Ultra project as a young man is definitely going to be discussed, and the possible effect that could have had on his psyche, including his gender confusion, will also be discussed. Didymus also says, we can all agree that the official story is never true. Yes, absolutely. So, before we get into Kaczynski, because that's, I think, the most interesting topic for tonight's show, I wanted to discuss a brief, unrelated topic, just because I thought it was interesting and I was looking into it today, and that topic happens to be the recent debate on Twitter that took place about ancient Greek warriors and their physicality. So I found this to be quite funny. I first stumbled upon this with this post by Dr. Roel, some Dutch name that I can't pronounce. And what he says is, yesterday my thread about ancient warriors' bodies was retweeted with fairly reasonable criticism. Since then, I have been inundated with abuse from literal fascists for daring to challenge their ideas about ancient Greece. For any adults in the room, here are the receipts. First of all, I can't stand how these leftist types talk these days. Even little things like calling screenshots and other items of evidence receipts. That I can't explain why, but for some reason that bothers me. The idea of calling all pieces of evidence receipts is just ridiculous to me. Also ridiculous and very feminine and telling of his intentions, his overall character, is this idea that he's been inundated with abuse from literal fascists. Anybody who, begins a conversation about a controversial issue by attacking their opponents like this and whining and crying about abuse in an intellectual conversation, it's such an unmanly thing to say, and it tells you, I think, what this man's perspective is going to be on this question. So to get to the beginning of this debate, we have to go to a Reddit post that he made. This was originally mentioned by him, retweeted from the Ask Historians Twitter account. We go to Reddit here. Somebody asked the question, did ancient soldiers train as hard as we imagine they did, or were they as hardcore as we think they are? So this question, first of all, is just talking about training and whether or not they were hardcore. And the person responding here, this is the Dr. Rowell, who is a university-employed academic. He responds on his Reddit account, and his response, I think, is based upon two main fallacies or misunderstandings of the question. First, he conflates two different types of soldiers and treats them interchangeably in order to suit his argument. The first type of soldier is the common peasant that was conscripted for war. These people were generally, farmers, craftsmen, just your average everyday peasant citizen that was called upon in times of need to serve in the army. So he conflates that group with the dedicated aristocratic warrior group that would have made up the core of the fighting force. So he routinely conflates these two and jumps from one to the other as it suits his argument. The second fallacy is sort of a dichotomy of extremes that he creates, which is he's trying to argue, on one hand, that ancient Greek warriors are not, or they didn't look like bodybuilders of today. The sort of, ripped, bulky types of bodybuilders that exist today who, consume I don't know how many thousands of calories every day and, spend a lot of time every single day training for muscle, for gaining muscle mass. So he's sort of attacking that and creating a straw man that, oh, this is what you think they looked like. But in reality, they were, on the other extreme, this is the other end of the dichotomy, they were not strong. That strength was not something that they valued or esteemed in ancient Greek military, but that they, instead of valuing them for their physique or their strength, they were valued for things like being able to march, being able to go days without food, endurance, discipline, these sorts of things. That's really what they valued back then. You could see it here in his conclusion. The Greeks understood that a general fitness, stamina, and self-discipline, combined with strong moral fiber, were far more important for a warrior than raw strength or weapon skill. In most cases, they could not choose. Their armies were made up of levies and volunteers from all walks of life, who had trained little for warfare, if at all. But when they started to introduce training for their soldiers, the training regimes reflected their priorities. These are not regimes aimed at creating the biggest, strongest, fastest, or most lethal fighters. They are aimed at fostering endurance, agility, flexibility, and most importantly, commitment to the cause. Then he goes on to include, finally, I should add that perhaps your boyfriend is also imagining what a Greek sculpture actually looks like. Here's an example. While there are some extreme cases of excessive musculature, these are usually depictions of Heracles, a literally superhuman symbol of strength. The ideal male body is not exceptionally massive. Here's another example he gives. It is toned, to be sure, but much more balanced and slender. So he's trying to characterize these statues as merely toned and slender. And, you know, it's no wonder why when you look at this fella, what he looks like. Other people have posted a number of pictures of him, and I wish I would have pulled them up before I started the stream, but basically this guy is the definition of a bookish nerd who's never lifted a weight in his life or never worked a hard day's labor in his life. He's not just slender, he's basically wilting away. So I'm not going to read all this, but basically if you got into this discussion, those are the two main problems with his argument. It's true, certainly, that the average farmhand who was called upon in times of need would not have been a ripped, muscular bodybuilder type of person. But to be sure, they would have been close to this. They would have certainly been close to this. And if they were, in fact, part of the elite, as he admits here, part of the elite class that did, here it is, the only exceptions were the small standing units that were maintained by some Greek states, who were expected to spend some or all of their time training for war. So he admits that there were units that were comprised of upperclassmen who could afford this type of thing, who were constantly training for war. So he admits this, and those people certainly would have been just as fit as this kind of sculpture, or more fit, more muscular. And as he says here with the idea that, you know, the average person would have been scrawny because they couldn't even afford to eat well, well, these upperclassmen who were dedicated soldiers would have absolutely eaten well, just as well as a modern day farmhand. And we all know, you know, the stereotype the farm boy or the farmer man who working hard most of his days, all of his life, has a strong physique. They might not look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, but that I think is a straw man. Nobody really believes that. So these interactions were pretty funny to me. The responses that he got from folks like Alaric the Barbarian, who says, "Hoplite warfare did demand a different physique than modern movie stars, but Rowell claims physical strength wasn't that important, which is just misleading. In fact, physical strength was a huge factor. It just wasn't upper body bulk. The legs and trunk were more critical." And, if you really want to get into this, read this thread, and you'll see the quotes that Rowell tries to respond with to back up his argument are all just sort of common sense of people saying that a soldier, a good warrior, is not training for athletics his whole life. He's not training to be bulked up his whole life. He's training to be a warrior, and that those are different things. And I don't think anybody questions that. So what is really the point of this debate? What is the purpose of this debate? Why is he trying to change the perception of the ancient warriors and telling people, oh, they weren't really bulky, they weren't really athletic, all that mattered was endurance and discipline and things like that? Well, for one, I think it's to cope with his own inathletic physique, but also because there's a general sentiment that is being pushed by the media today. As you can see here in this Daily Mail article, too much exercise can kill you, especially if you're a white man. Study finds 7.5 hours a week of fitness doubles your risk of heart disease. Researchers in Chicago assessed exercise patterns over the course of 25 years. They found that very active white men are 86% more likely to experience a buildup of plaque in the heart arteries by middle age. This was not the case in black men, based on 3,175 participants. So there is this general sentiment, I think, being pushed by the mainstream that white men need to stop glorifying good physiques. We need to stop exercising. We need to stop getting fit. Because, it could kill us. And as part of that campaign that they're running against us, we need to obviously break down these harmful myths about the legendary figures of the past, such as the ancient Greek warriors, because they weren't concerned with physique and exercise either. They just wanted commitment. They just wanted, team players. They just wanted people who could go a few days without food and then maybe, eat a little soy tofu sandwich or something like that, and then sip on a glass of cool oat milk and, just go with the flow. Do what has to be done. Get through the hard day without complaining. That's all that the ancient Greek warriors were. You need to stop glorifying them. Quit with these misconceptions about them being physically impressive. Because that's a harmful stereotype that is leading white men to habits that are going to end up harming them. So I thought that was interesting to see. And I do believe that this guy here Let's see if we could just find a real quick picture of him. Yeah, these types of people always have to debunk. You gotta debunk these harmful glorifications of the past. It's just none of it's real. None of it's real. You gotta get over that. Anything that inspires you, well, it wasn't real. So, and of course, he's in all kinds of mainstream media, publications and platforms and whatnot being pushed to the public. So, anyway, Dynamis says, pull up the term boxer, a professional fighter. Now, I'm sure this fella has a, he's got a what I would consider a normal athletic physique. This guy's not crazy bulky. Hippocratic Oath says he should consider transitioning. So, he has that Gollum look. Yeah. Anyway, that's enough of that just for a brief intro, and hopefully more people have gotten in to see the main topic of discussion, so let's begin with that. Let's begin with TED. Now, I want to preface this whole conversation by saying I agree with Ted on a lot of what he said. And I was the type of person growing up who, when I heard about the Unabomber and his manifesto, it was the type of thing that I didn't want to read because I thought he was crazy. I remember in my early teens, my father brought up the Unabomber's manifesto and suggested that I read it. And I remember vividly, my reaction was to think he was crazy, to think he was promoting somebody who was obviously insane. This guy was a domestic terrorist. How could you take his ideas seriously? But as I grew up and I started to understand the world more clearly, and my ideas started to crystallize, and I came to a lot of new conclusions that in fact were more in line with those of Ted Kaczynski's. I ended up revisiting him, and by the time I was prepared enough to even explore Kaczynski's ideas, I remember the first time reading the book, and within the first page or two, thinking to myself, holy crap, this guy was right about a lot. I had already sort of independently come to ideas that corresponded with his. And, you know, the main points that he makes about the problems with the leftist personality, even the problems with conservatives that he points out, the overall negative effects that the Industrial Revolution had on society and on humans in general. These sorts of things I was already, I either already accepted them or I was ready to accept them. So I come at this as somebody who is very sympathetic to Kaczynski, and I want to believe that he was an authentic human being, that he wasn't just some actor. But being the person that I am, who I do believe that the official narratives given to us are largely false if it comes from the mainstream media, and knowing that the government is capable of incredible acts of psyopery. They are capable of going to great lengths that the average person wouldn't be able to conceive of, to create fake staged events and phenomena in society. And given the facts that we're about to explore, I have to admit that there is certainly a possibility that Kaczynski was either an actor or that he was, in a subtle way, programmed to carry out these actions in order to blackwash them. Now, I'm not going to come to a definite conclusion in this stream, but I do want to, I want to say that it's unfortunate, but one of our heroes here, Kaczynski, might be a tool that is being used against us. So, let's get into it. I made a little Word document with some of the main points that Mathis made here. And the first was, Mathis is, of course, claiming that TED was used to blackwash. Now, who was he blackwashing in particular, besides just the ideas in general? One possible group that he was meant to blackwash was Earth First, a radical, quote-unquote, environmental group. Here's the words of Mathis. One of the government's main targets in the Unabomber event was Earth First, a radical environmental group that actually wanted to save the environment instead of just talk about it. Earth First was making some headway in the late 80s, early 90s, which is why they were linked to the Unabomber. The FBI had been harassing Earth First for years, including the car bombing and libeling of Judy Berry and Daryl Cherney in 1990. Berry and Cherney won a $4.4 million judgment against the FBI and Oakland police in 2002 for First Amendment violations. On March 21, 2011, a U.S. federal judge in California ordered the FBI to preserve evidence relating to the car bombing. The FBI was planning to destroy all evidence in the case. Although Earth First is still around, they were seriously hurt by the Unabomber Manifesto and Kaczynski's trial, where he quoted from the Earth First Journal. Now, him quoting from the journal, Earth First Journal, is not the only way that the media linked Kaczynski with Earth First. Major news networks during that time also released stories basically saying that Kaczynski was a member of Earth First because in some obscure FBI memorandum or document, Kaczynski was mentioned alongside Earth First. So these major news networks such as ABC trotted out the narrative that Kaczynski was a member of Earth First or was somehow inspired by or working with Earth First. So that's one particular organization that seems to have been blackwashed by the Unabomber. And like I said already, the blackwashing of just the ideas in general of being against industrialization, being against urbanization, being against a lot of the major tendencies of leftism in modern society, their over-socialization, these big ideas that Kaczynski presented. And by the way, one, I think, straw man that a lot of people take about Kaczynski today, even among our circles in the right, is that Kaczynski was purely anti-technology, and that anybody who promotes Kaczynski is also like a anti-tech Luddite. And to some extent that's true, but in my own personal opinion, I'm not anti-technology per se, but I am anti-industry, anti-industrialization. So that is a distinction that we could talk more about later, but I just wanted to mention that before continuing. Vision says, has Mathis been mentioned yet? Yes, this is all Mathis, these quotes. Loki Death says, his cabin is now in a CIA warehouse. Yep, we're going to talk about that. So the next interesting point that Mathis makes here is that there were deep CIA ties in every single university attended by Ted Kaczynski, including, here we're going to include, documented examples of how the CIA operated in the same time frame to control possible grassroots opposition among students. This was part of a project that was partially disclosed called Operation Chaos. So here, in the words of Mathis, after getting a PhD at the University of Michigan, Ted was hired by the University of California at Berkeley as an assistant professor in 1967. Berkeley is also a big spook lab. Most people don't know all the nuclear facilities are run out of Berkeley, including Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore. In addition, both Berkeley and Stanford were tied to spook programs in the 1960s, including the drug pushing we saw in my papers on the faked Tate murders and the faked Zodiac murders. Both Stanford and Berkeley were involved in MKUltra, for instance, as well as COINTELPRO and Chaos. In fact, the Unabomber event was just a continuation of Chaos, which was supposed to have ended in 1970. How do I know? Because, as you will see, it was clearly created to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize any and all leftist groups, including hippies, anti-war protesters, and environmentalists. Which, by the way, these, like the hippie movement, the anti-war movement, these groups were either created whole cloth as controlled opposition or heavily infiltrated and misled by intelligence agents and other government spooks. Real environmentalists were and still are considered dangerous leftists, since they threaten the profit margins of large parts of corporate America. That date is a big clue. 1967 was when the feds were infiltrating Haight-Ashbury and many other liberal centers in force. For instance, that is when Roger Smith and David Smith opened their fake clinic there, gathering around them all the actors that would be the Manson family players. It is also when Tussman Experimental College was in full swing at Berkeley. This was actually an intelligence project at Berkeley from 65 to 69 run by Joseph Tussman. Tussman served in Army intelligence in the 40s, and this is admitted by the mainstream. I assume Tussman was still serving in intelligence in the 60s. One of those who came in on the ground level of this experiment was Terence McKenna, who was recruited for the Tussman Experimental College in its first year, in 1965. He was still there in 67 when Kaczynski arrived at Berkeley. You may know that McKenna later became a New Age guru and LSD pusher in the mold of Tim Leary or Ram Dass. You may also be interested to know that McKenna later admitted he was an intelligence asset. Last year, 2013, Gnostic Media uncovered and published audio of a December 1994 lecture by McKenna at Esalen. Here is what he said, quote, "And certainly when I reached La Chorrera in 1971, I had a price on my head by the FBI. I was running out of money. I was at the end of my rope. And then they recruited me and said, quote, you know, with a mouth like yours, there's a place for you in our organization. And I've worked in deep background positions, about which the less said the better. And then about 15 years ago, they shifted me into public relations, and I've been there to the present. Good to know, but McKenna is still hedging there, since we can put this recruitment back to 65. Being under Tussman means he was already a recruit then. We also have a clue that in both Berkeley and Stanford are part of the greater San Francisco or Bay Area. Stanford is famous for its MKUltra program, since it is admitted that Gordon Lish, Ken Kesey, Robert Hunter, and several other high-profile people volunteered there in the early 60s. Okay, so all of this is to establish that the milieu that Kaczynski was a part of back in the early 60s, the circles that he was running in, the institutions that he was working in, were heavily infiltrated, controlled from the top by admitted spooks, and that projects, social engineering projects, were originating in these same institutions and departments that Kaczynski was running in. Continuing, it is admitted that Kaczynski was also a volunteer or recruit of MKUltra at Harvard. Curiously, that fact is scrubbed from Ted's Wikipedia page, but it is admitted that he took part in Henry Murray's tests from 1959 to 1962, and on Murray's page we are told the tests were sponsored by the CIA under its MKUltra program. From the fall of 1959 through the spring of 1962, Murray was responsible for the ethically questionable CIA-sponsored MKUltra experiments in which 22 undergraduates were used as guinea pigs. So, is it just a coincidence that Kaczynski seemed to have traveled from one MKUltra center in Harvard, Cambridge, to another, the Bay Area? Actually, he traveled between 3 MKUltra centers, since the University of Michigan, where he got his doctorate degree, has also been tied to CIA Bluebird and Monarch programs. According to a February 5th, 1975 CIA document entitled, quote, Behavior, Drugs, and Testing, the University of Michigan was involved in the early stages of Project Bluebird, which is similar to MKUltra in its uses of drugs for brainwashing or mind control. In searching the terms Berkeley MKUltra, I also stumbled upon this quote from the book Acid Dreams, page 173, quote, It was a typical 60s scene. A group of scruffy, long-haired students stood in a circle passing joints and hash pipes. The setting could have been Berkeley, Ann Arbor, or any other hip campus. But these students were actually FBI agents, and the school they attended was known as Hoover University, located at Quantico Marine Base in Virginia. This elite academy specializes in training G-men to penetrate left-wing organizations, to cultivate the proper counterculture image. They were told not to wash or bathe for several days before infiltrating the group of radicals. Refresher courses were also held for FBI agents who had successfully immersed themselves in the drug culture of their respective locales. So, that's... Anyway, he goes on, what college is in Ann Arbor? That's right, University of Michigan. Strange that Ann Arbor should be used as the example here by the authors, right next to Berkeley. Do you normally think of Ann Arbor and Berkeley in the same thought? I don't, or at least I didn't until now. So, it's a fact that Kaczynski was part of a sort of MK Ultra mind control or mind influencing experiment at Harvard. He then moved to Berkeley, or he ended up teaching at Berkeley, and he got his doctorate in the University of Michigan. Let me make sure I'm getting that right. So he got his BA at Harvard. We're going to talk about the experiment in just a second here. Okay, then he got his master's and doctorate at Michigan. Then he went to UC Berkeley, where he taught. So, from one MK Ultra center to another to another. Now, what was the nature of this experiment? This, I think, is this is really the crux of the issue. What was the nature of this experiment? Was this experiment a way for them to program Kaczynski, or was this experiment what Miles Mathis hypothesizes, which is basically a training for a conscious, willing CIA recruit? Which one is it? Well, let's read a description of the experiment. Let me look at the chat for just a moment here. Simon Scola says, I had no idea about McKenna. Yep. McKenna and many hippie, liberal influencers of that time were directly tied with military intelligence. And the quote from McKenna about how he was working with the FBI came from an Esalen Institute talk that he gave, which is, if you ever get the chance, check out the late Matthew North's work on Joe Rogan, where he ties Joe Rogan to Esalen and a number of other spooky organizations. Rogan seems to be the modern iteration, or the modern sort of project coming out of this same spooky institutions. So, anyway, what was the nature of this experiment? There's a number of strange details here that I can't really I can't really explain adequately. Actually, before we get into the description of the experiment, let's look up Murray, because he's an interesting character. Where's his full name? I think it was something Alexander Murray. Here, Henry Alexander Murray. This is an interesting figure, too. And the fact that this guy in particular was, no matter how you spin it, he was the handler of Kaczynski, whether this was an MK Ultra programming thing or a training exercise for intentional recruits, this man would have been Kaczynski's handler. And this man is a very high-ranking, important man to have as your personal handler. And it tells me that since this guy was directly behind the experiment that links Kaczynski with all this spookiness, it tells me that there was a big project that was being run here behind the scenes, because this guy is just too important to be running minor, unimportant experiments on college students without some kind of grander plan behind it. So Murray was an American psychologist who was born into a very wealthy family. He was the daughter of a financier, Samuel Babcock, a big-time wealthy banker. And Mathis explains to us all of his family connections here. He says he's from the peerage Murrays, the Murrays of the British aristocracy. He's listed at thepeerage.com. I have shown these Murrays are the same as the Stanleys, who also, if you've followed any of my content in the past, the Stanleys are top-level puppet string pullers, extremely wealthy, extremely powerful. They've been, one of the biggest families of Britain for centuries. Think Morgan Stanley, those kinds of people. And they link us to the very top of the peerage, including all the dukes and kings. His mother was of the New York Babcocks, and his father was a Poitiers, linking us to Sidney Poitiers. More importantly, these Murrays go straight back to Erith, Scotland, where they were the Earls of Dunmore. They didn't come to the U.S. until about 1880. The fourth Earl of Dunmore died in 1809, and his wife was Charlotte Stuart. Another important family, the Stuarts. Royal family. Daughter of the Earl of Galloway. This links us directly to the Keiths, Drummonds, Montgomerys, Cochranes, Hamiltons, Herberts, Cokes, Campbells, and so on. Henry Murray's close cousin was the 7th Earl of Dunmore, Charles Adolphus Murray. The 4th Earl had been the governor of New York, Virginia, and the Bahamas. These Murrays are also the Dukes of Athol. Henry Murray joined the Harvard Psychological Clinic as assistant director at the age of 33. During the Second World War, he joined the OSS as a lieutenant colonel, so he is an admitted spook. Okay. So, a very important fellow to have conducting just a psychological test on undergrads at Harvard. And the crazy thing about this too is the mainstream has never admitted that there was a useful conclusion to this study. They haven't admitted what the study's conclusions were at all. Which tells you, or it should tell you, that whatever conclusions they came to, or whatever purpose the study was intended for, is far too secretive, or what's the word? Gosh, there's a particular word I'm looking for here. What word am I looking for here, guys? Far too word. Anyway, far too important, confidential. They wanted to keep it undercover, so they didn't even, they're not even willing to admit what the conclusions of the study were or the purpose of the study was. So we have to sort of read between the lines and see that there was a connection to the MKUltra project, and to think maybe there was a grand point to this project, such as creating a man such as Ted Kaczynski, to program somebody who could turn into the type of person that they wanted Kaczynski to turn into. Classified, clandestine. No, that wasn't the word. It was, don't get me back on that. Sensitive. It's a word like sensitive. I don't know. Anyway, this fellow Murray was also connected with Timothy Leary, by the way. Murray was supervising Timothy Leary in the studies of psychedelic drugs. And Leary himself was connected to all kinds of people in the hippie countercultural movement. So while they were producing the hippie countercultural movement with one hand, they were producing sort of a conservative, anti-industrial, anti-technology, reactionary movement on the other hand. You know, these people, of course, would like to control all sides of the conversation. So, what exactly happened in this experiment? Kaczynski was accepted by Harvard in the spring of '58. He was not yet 16 years old. First weird point. What kind of a 16-year-old, no matter how smart they are, actually gets accepted to Harvard without a high school diploma? And even if they have a high school diploma, what 16-year-old actually gets accepted to Harvard? It's very strange. It seems almost as if he was selected for another reason. One friend remembers urging Kaczynski's father not to let the boy go, arguing he's too young, too immature, and Harvard too impersonal. But Turk wouldn't listen. Ted's going to Harvard was an ego trip for him, the friend recalls. Murray, a wealthy, blue-blooded New Yorker, hinting at his high level of aristocratic connection, was both a scientist and a humanist. Before the war, he had been the director of the Harvard Psychological Clinic. During the war, he served in the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of the CIA, helping develop psychological screening tests for applicants and monitoring military experiments on brainwashing. After the war, Murray returned to Harvard, where he continued to refine techniques of personality assessment. By 1950, he had resumed studies on Harvard undergrads that he had begun in rudimentary form before the war, titled Multiform Assessments of Personality Development Among Gifted College Men. The experiment in which Kaczynski participated was the last and most elaborate of these. In their post-war form, these experiments focused on stressful interpersonal relations, designing confrontations akin to those mock interrogations that he helped to orchestrate for the OSS. Kaczynski has said that he was pressured into participating. What does that mean? Detail number 2, that is strange. What does it mean to be pressured into participating? What kind of pressure was put on him to participate in this? Also, the title of this project, Multiform Assessments of Personality Development Among Gifted College Men, is the reason that Kaczynski was invited to Harvard at the age of 16 because he fit a personality profile and had a level of intelligence that the CIA believed would make him a good candidate for this type of programming? We can only guess. But this idea that he was pressured into participating, what did that look like? His hesitation turned out to be sensible. researchers gave the volunteers almost no information about the experiment in which they would participate. Each was simply asked to answer yes to the following question. Would you be willing to contribute to the solution of certain psychological problems, parts of an ongoing program of research in the development of personality, by serving as a subject in a series of experiments or taking a number of tests, averaging about 2 hours per week through the academic year at the current college rate per hour? Now, let's just continue here. So they say 2 hours per week. With pretty much no heads up on what they would be studying. In fact, it would never be clear what the certain psychological problems were, and the test that served as the centerpiece for this undertaking appears remarkably similar to the old OSS stress test. Now, this is one detail that sort of lends credence to Mathis's hypothesis. If it has all the appearances of sort of a recruitment stress test, maybe it is. Students would be given the third degree, but whereas the OSS applicants must have known that enduring unpleasant interrogations could be a part of their job, these students did not. The intent was to catch them by surprise, to deceive them, and to brutalize them. The students were led to believe that they would debate their philosophy of life with another student like themselves. In fact, they were confronted by a well-prepared stooge. So this is the description of the actual operations of this experiment. When the subject arrived, he was escorted to a brilliantly lighted room and seated in front of a one-way mirror. A motion picture camera recorded his every move and facial expression through a hole in the wall. Electrodes leading to machines that recorded his heart and respiratory rates were attached to his body. Forrest Robinson, the author of a biography of Murray, described what happens next. As instructed, the unwitting subject attempted to represent and to defend his personal philosophy of life. Invariably, however, he was frustrated, and finally brought to expressions of real anger by the withering assault of his older, more sophisticated opponent, while fluctuations in the subject's pulse and respiration were measured. Not surprisingly, most participants found this highly unpleasant, even traumatic. We were led into the room with bright lights, very bright. One of them, codenamed Kringle, recalled afterward. I had a sensation somewhat akin to someone being strapped on the electric chair with these electrodes. I really started getting hit real hard. Wham, wham, wham. And me getting hotter and more irritated, and my heartbeat going up, and sweating terribly. Right away, said another, codenamed Trump, describing his experience afterwards, I didn't like the interrogator. So, this is another bizarre description. Strapped into an electric chair with electrodes all over your body and getting hit real hard. What does that mean? Were they being electrocuted? Getting hotter and more irritated and heartbeat going up? Sweating terribly? Were they being drugged somehow? Were they being drugged somehow in this experiment? Because this, no matter how much you're getting berated by somebody who disagrees with your personal philosophy, if this is just some stranger, it generally, for the average person, doesn't take long for you to say to yourself, okay, fuck this guy. What does their opinion matter? They're just being a dick. This description seems like something else was going on here. Here's another. Dr. G came waltzing over and he put on those electrodes, but in that process, while he was doing that, kind of whistling. And then Mr. R, who was bubbling over, dancing around, started to talk to me about he liked my suit. The buzzer would ring, or something like that. We were supposed to begin. He was being sarcastic, or pretty much of a wise guy. And the first thing that entered my mind was to get up and ask him outside immediately. But that was out of the question, because the electrodes and the movie and all that. I kind of sat there and began to fume, and then he went on, and he got my goat, and I couldn't think of what to say, and then they came along and took my electrodes off. Very bizarre. During the last year of the experiment, Murray made the students available to his graduate student assistants to serve as guinea pigs for their own research projects. By graduation, as Kenneth Kennison, one of the researchers, summarized the process later, each student had spent approximately 200 hours in the research and provided hundreds of pages of information about himself, his beliefs, his past life, his family, his college life, his development, his fantasies, his hopes and dreams. 200 hours. How many hours would it take for you to get used to this? Somebody, some stranger, berating your personal philosophy. I don't think it would take long. It would take me probably 10 minutes to calm down and realize, okay, this is just some stranger. Fuck him. I'm not going to listen to him. What does it matter what he's saying? How could somebody be subjected to 200 hours of this style of interrogation and sort of psychological deconstruction and not just get tired of it? Something else, I believe, something else must have been going on. Probably drugs. It's not out of the question that they would have been drugged through these electrodes on their skin. Everybody knows LSD can be absorbed through the skin. So maybe over this study, because we know Murray was involved in studying psychedelics. He was working with Timothy Leary. He was involved in MK Ultra, and we know MK Ultra was in a lot of their experiments doing things with covert administration of psychological or psychedelic drugs. They would do things like, start dosing somebody with LSD, starting with a small dose and over a period of time increasing the dose, slowly divorcing them from reality without them even knowing it. Could that be what was going on there? Because 200 hours of this kind of thing just makes no sense. It goes on to say, why were the students willing to endure this ongoing stress and probing into their private lives? Some who had assisted Murray in the experiment confessed to me that they wondered about this themselves. So some of the people who this author or this reporter talked to can't even explain why they continued with this kind of abusive experiment. That also suggests to me that they were being drugged. But they and we can only speculate that some of the students, including Kaczynski, did it for the money. That some, again probably including Kaczynski, had doubts about their own psychic health and were seeking reassurance about it. That some, suffering from Harvard's well-known anomie, were lonely and needed someone to talk to. And that some simply had an interest in helping to advance scientific knowledge. None of these explanations make any sense. If you need money, you can get a better job than getting brutally if you have doubts about your own psychological health and want reassurance, the last thing you'd want is for someone to tear apart your philosophy of life. If you're lonely and want someone to talk to, the last place you want to go is somebody who is just pure abusive to you. So none of these details make any sense. And even here we say, what was the purpose of the experiment? Keniston told me that he wasn't sure what the goals were. Murray was not the most systematic scientist, he explained. So, it continues with, the writer Alexander Cockburn has asked whether the students might have been given the hallucinogenic drug LSD without their knowledge, possibly at the request of the CIA. By the late 50s, according to some, Murray had become quite interested in hallucinogenics, including LSD and psilocybin. And soon after Murray's experiments on Kaczynski and his classmates were underway in 1960, Timothy Leary returned to Harvard and with Murray's blessing began his experiments with psilocybin. In his autobiography, Leary, who would dedicate the rest of his life to promoting hallucinogenic drugs, described Murray as, quote, the wizard of personality assessment, who, as OSS chief psychologist, had monitored military experiments on brainwashing and sodium amytal interrogation. Murray expressed great interest in our drug research project and offered his support. Another interesting bit is that Kaczynski was given a code name in this experiment. He was codename Lawful. Codename Lawful. Mathis mentions about that. Here, Kaczynski was given the codename Lawful. He asks, wouldn't your stupid volunteers become witting once you started giving them CIA code names? Don't you think these Harvard geniuses might have caught on that they weren't just testing cherry lifesavers and gumdrops when they were given code names and forced to sign secrecy documents? So, what did this effect have on Kaczynski? I mean, we can only speculate. One possible effect was this gender schizophrenia, this gender confusion that Kaczynski allegedly had, where he says, in a psychiatric evaluation I believe at the prison, or during his trial, the psychiatrist at the Federal Correctional Institute conducted an evaluation in which Johnson, the psychiatrist, revealed Kaczynski had persistent and intense sexual fantasies about being a woman. While he was a graduate student at the University of Michigan in 1967, he went to a psychiatrist to discuss his wishes for a sex change operation, but in the waiting room he decided he could not go forward. Instead, he told the psychiatrist that he was depressed about the possibility of being drafted. His near confession of his feelings so filled him with rage, in this case directed at psychiatrists, that he went through a major transformation. Quote, as I walked away from the building afterwards, Kaczynski wrote in documents released today, I felt disgusted about what my uncontrolled sexual cravings had almost led me to do. And I felt humiliated, and I violently hated the psychiatrist. Just then, there came a major turning point in my life. Like a phoenix, I burst from the ashes of my despair to a glorious new hope. Kaczynski's new hope? To take his rage out on others, including the psychiatrist. Quote, I will kill, Kaczynski wrote, but I will make at least some effort to avoid detection so that I can kill again. The evaluation also states that Kaczynski was extremely angry at his family, blah, blah, blah. So, Was this project meant to, I don't know, maybe it did a couple things. Maybe it put specific ideas into Kaczynski's mind, but maybe it also just broke him down and created the type of person who would someday snap and lose any kind of empathy, lose any kind of fear, lose any kind of self-preservation instinct, and go on to do to blow up some people. Who knows? I'm still of the opinion that he was basically, a victim, that he was used by the powers that be to blackwash good ideas. I'm not on board with Mathis's assessment that he was an actor. So anyway, that's the MK Ultra event in Kaczynski's life, and I think clearly it had a major toll on his psychological stability. But once again, the questions are there, that why would he go willingly for 200 hours in this kind of emotionally brutal, psychologically destructive study? Why would he do that? And what was really going on with these electrodes? And were there psychological or psychedelic drugs involved and all that? I would speculate, yes, that there was definitely something more going on behind the scenes there. And maybe even at that time, they already had some blackmail on Kaczynski, or something that pushed him to continue to participate in this project. Continuing on, let's look at the chat here. Zyphos said, "You don't think he got groomed by a sociopathic science Chad who served the same psychological role as his father earlier in life? They probably gave him a thumbprint." I'm not sure. Good Maki says, Trunzinski. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be, seems to suggest that if you undergo enough LSD-induced psychological deconstruction, that gender confusion is a possible outcome. Science gays groomed him using acid. The great precursor to Discord grooming. So, continuing on here. Now, the next bit of evidence that Mathis brings up is this bizarre Washington, D.C. museum propaganda piece about Ted Kaczynski, which was exhibited before his trial even finished. Let us... Here's a picture. Oh, that's not the... I'm trying to find a picture for you guys. Now this is the current location of the cabin. In a CIA or an FBI storage warehouse. And I'll just read here. He says, the exhibit at this museum in Washington, D.C., called the Newseum, is evidence of a psyop, since you should find it very strange to find an alleged serial killer's cabin in a D.C. museum. The entire Newseum is obviously a museum of propaganda. It was opened in 1997, while the Unabomber trial was still going on, and looks to have been built just to promote the continuation of the Unabomber story, and others. For instance, one of the other top exhibits at the museum is its 9/11 gallery, sponsored by Comcast. Sponsored by Comcast? You have to laugh. Not only is corporate sponsorship at a museum a big red flag, but the Comcast name is too. Comcast is just another of many CIA fronts, and it has long been mining data for the government. Just check out this 2006 article with the title, quote, Comcast uses technology from CIA-backed call miner to mine data from every recorded customer service call in its Midwest call center. But it isn't just Comcast. The entire museum is corporate sponsored and was founded by Al Neuharth, the man behind USA Today. Like Comcast, USA Today is CIA sponsored. All the newspapers and magazines now are, but USA Today was created from whole cloth by intelligence. The other major newspapers controlled by the CIA, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, were once semi-independent. They were engulfed slowly over more than a century. But USA Today didn't arrive until 1982, many years after intelligence had already completely swallowed up the media. So it could be built from the ground up to deliver propaganda in the most efficient manner. So them displaying his cabin in a propaganda museum before the trial is even over is definitely suspicious. Somebody says in the comment, mushrooms are an amazing tool for self-discovery. Mushrooms are an amazing tool at breaking down inhibitions and basically deconstructing your current psyche. Now, that is both the sort of allure of it and the danger of it. Just as a brief side note about mushrooms, I had one in my entire life, one seriously intense mushroom trip. It's the only time I ever took mushrooms. I bought them from the person who actually grew them, so they were fresh. He dried them out, but they were freshly dried. This was in my early 20s. Freshly dried. It was the strain psilocybin cyanese, which is one of the more potent sciences. That's how you say it. This one. One of the more potent magic mushroom, psilocybin mushrooms. And I took probably way more than I should have. And for the first half of the trip, it was just your classic, whoa, the walls are melting, whoa, I can, see colors. I had a moment when I laid back on my bed, and I had this vivid, visual, dreamlike experience of being an eagle soaring over mountains and over plains and all this. But what happened afterwards was a total breakdown of my psychological defenses, essentially, and a very difficult and harsh reflection on all of the problems that I saw within my own personality. I remember calling my mom sobbing because I wanted to tell her how sorry I was for all the bad things that I had ever done to her and all these things. So obviously I have no interest in ever doing them again, and obviously I would not recommend them to people. But the point of my story is, people think mushrooms are something to just have a lot of fun with, or something that is going to somehow reveal the truth to you about whatever it is you're looking for the truth on. But I think really all that it does, its objective effect, is to break down preconceptions, break down psychological defenses, and enable you to make radical psychological changes in a short period of time. If that could be done in a positive way, which I hope and I think, looking back on it, my reaction happened to be positive, but it could have just as easily been the opposite. It puts you into a sort of almost a blank slate, a moment of being a blank slate, where whatever you reconstruct upon that blank slate, you have to be very careful with. It could have gone any other way. It could have gone a really bad way too. So that's my take on mushrooms, and I don't recommend them. They're very dangerous, risky. Anyway, so that's another little detail that Mathis comes up with here, is that the inclusion in these Washington D.C. media museums and other propaganda outlets. Now, here's another very interesting detail to me. Some of his victims are kind of bizarre choices. The first red flag, as Mathis puts it, I'll just read. Red flags are also thrown up by the Unabomber's alleged victims. We are told one of them, Thomas Mosser, was an executive at Burson Marsteller, but he wasn't. For some reason, the story has changed since 1994. According to the New York Times, Mosser had just been promoted the week before to general manager of Young and Rubicam, which is the company that owns Burson Marsteller. He was also still its executive vice president. Young and Rubicam owned Burson Marsteller, but Mosser no longer worked in that subsidiary. Why was that information changed or scrubbed? It is wrong both on Kaczynski's page and on Burson Marsteller's page, and it doesn't appear on Young and Rubicam's page at all. And guess what we get from another New York Times article dated the next day? Quote, his Navy background was written all over him, Mr. O'Dwyer said, referring to Mr. Mosser's 4 years of service as a naval officer during the Vietnam War. Red flag. I wonder if the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI, was written all over him too. Now, I wanted to show you something about Burson Marsteller. Burson Marsteller is one of the biggest, most successful, most elite, prestigious propaganda agencies out there that works for governments. They work for the big corporations. They are one of the world's biggest bipartisan propaganda producers out there. So for one of Kaczynski's victims to have been a high-level Navy background, naval officer, working for Burson Marsteller. It's a strange connection. Here's just a little something about Burson Marsteller. I have a clip lined up for you. I have to go get a water because my throat is too dry and I didn't bring a water. So I'll be right back. I'm just going to play this clip. And I'll be back with you guys in just a moment to discuss it.
Today, one of the largest PR firms in the world specializes in the art of crisis management. Burson Marsteller holds offices in 35 countries and has served clients as varied as cigarette maker Philip Morris, chemical giant Union Carbide, and the Monsanto Corporation, a company specializing in genetic engineering and other life sciences. Like the Rendon Group, Burson Marsteller is bipartisan to the core. Its worldwide president and chief executive, Mark Penn, served as Hillary Clinton's key political advisor during the 2008 election. The most disturbing facet of Burson Marsteller is its willingness to work with the world's worst human rights violators. They ran PR for the Indonesian government as it committed genocide in East Timor. They worked closely with the Nigerian government and Royal Dutch Shell during and after the Biafran War in Nigeria, and they helped to improve the image of a US-backed Argentine military junta led by General Jorge Videla.
One of their clients in the 1970s was the brutal Argentine junta, which had taken control of the government there and was rounding up dissidents, systematically torturing, beating, killing people, and flying out over the ocean and dumping bodies. Not a really good public image. So the Burson Marsteller firm was used by Argentina, hired by Argentina, and went to work for them quite happily under a FAB contract to improve the image of Argentina in the international financial community and in the Western press.
In some ways, it should not be surprising that public relations has evolved into companies like Burson Marsteller.
So, just kind of strange to have that connection there. Why did he target him? And this is the type of firm, this is the type of agency that I believe would be capable of executing a great psyop such as the Unabomber. So that's one interesting connection. The other is David Galanter, who was these are my words, a Jew spook written all over him. Alleged damage to his right eye is not apparent in any photo of him whatsoever. Allegedly, the Unabomber's bomb permanently damaged his right eye and basically caused him to go blind in it. But we don't see any or any evidence of this damage in any photo of Galanter. He is a, very typical, who-ish spook type of person. But at the time of the attack, he was relatively obscure. He had written a single book, and it is just a very strange target for Kaczynski to have chosen. Other names from targets that he chose: Epstein, a Charles Epstein. We all know who Epstein might have been related to. Another famous Epstein involved in intelligence operations. And then his last victim was a Murray, possibly related to the Murray who conducted the MKUltra project on him to begin with. It's just a couple of strange coincidences there. Okay, a couple of very strange coincidences. So, and here, the last little note that I have here is Michael Hoffman's take, which is, quote, studying how the cryptocracy fabricates and packages the Unabomb ritual on the stage of public affairs reveals a virtuoso performance of a Masonic psychodrama wherein terror, symbolism, and code language synthesize to form the alchemical elixir for the processing of humanity. So, those are all the main points that I wanted to go over here. If you want to read Mathis's article, it's on his site. I'd recommend it just for all the interesting details that he brings up, even though I disagree with his conclusion, and I know that Mathis doesn't like me. He thinks I'm a spook, and even though I told him in the past I wouldn't read his articles anymore, I can't just plagiarize all the facts that he compiled here and not mention him. So Mathis, if you ever come across this or someone brings it to your attention, sorry, I didn't want to plagiarize you. But anyway, what final thoughts on Kaczynski for me are, like I said at the beginning, I think he had some very good ideas. I think his overall critique of the effect on humanity that the Industrial Revolution brought about are good. And I think his characterization of leftists is also quite good. Very poignant and well written, in my opinion. But the overall effect that the Unabomber had on the discourse as a whole in society on these ideas was negative. If you bring up anything against industrialization, if you bring up a lot of the good critiques that Kaczynski made, you are, in the minds of the normie, instantly relegated to the category of a kook, because you are, in their minds, connected to this horrible, schizophrenic, evil man who killed a lot of innocent people in their minds. So that, I think, is the overall effect that the Unabomber project had, and it's unfortunate because, I do believe that Kaczynski was a genuine guy. I don't think he was an actor. So that's all I got for Kaczynski. Now let's move over to the chat. If you guys like my presentation here, if you guys enjoy my work, consider leaving a super chat. I've got a link. If you have any suggestions, if you have any comments you want me to read, I already read most of your comments in the chat. But if you want to support the channel, I'd like to do more live streams like this. I'm trying to be more consistent. So hook a brother up. Let's get into the chat. What do you guys want to talk about for the next few minutes? I could do another maybe 20 minutes of show. Tor says Michael Hoffman's Judaism Discovered has some interesting facts about Jews, how they go to the bathroom, etc. Tor says Mathis is wrong about things he mentioned in the article. Earl says, has Mathis matched you up with a double? Actually, Mathis made a number of what the hell? This has never happened. There. He made a number of false statements about me. This was back in 2017. He even titles it Hut, the first 4 letters of my last name. And actually, one of the critiques that he made, he says, "What got me writing today was Apollonian Germ on YouTube. Real name Michael Huttner." That is my real name. "One of my readers sent me to him, since Germ seems to be promoting me. He isn't. He is trying to tie me to people I don't wish to be tied to, including himself and Julius Evola." This is the one thing that he said that I would agree with at this point in my intellectual development. I'm no longer a fan of Evola. Even when I was talking about Evola, I didn't fully understand his ideas at that time. So that's one thing I think he actually got right, is that Evola was kind of a spooky figure, and I don't like his philosophy as a whole. That's a whole other topic to get into. But anyway, the false statements that he made about me, he says, "If you search my name, you come up with crisis communications expert, CEO of Fenton, this guy, Michael Huttner." No relation to me whatsoever. I had never heard of this guy. I'm not related to him at all. And then see here where we find a Michael Dean Huttner of Boulder, Colorado, related to the Bienenstocks and Hertzes. I have no Bienenstocks or Hertzes in my extended family. No ties to Denver whatsoever. Is Michael Dean Huttner related to the Germ? No. No relation. Then here's another one. This guy, David Huttner, who ran for president. This fella. "Study that face. If you trust this man at a glance, you need years of practice in studying faces." I agree. This guy is not a trustworthy face. Grandfather of the Germ? Who knows? No, not my grandfather. No relation. Never heard of him. So yeah, he definitely didn't do some very good research, especially considering, I'm on Facebook. I'm not like I've never tried to hide my identity. Let's see. Here's a picture of me with my dad. Here's my dad. Half brother, 2 half sisters, stepmom. Let's see. Here's me and my mother. I'm not, like, I really hate the idea that I should hide. Here's me and some extended family. This is my grandfather. This is my grandmother. Mom. Cousin from Norway. I've always hated the idea that I should hide who I am, that I should cower away from whoever the fuck is going to come after me for having these ideas. So, for any obsessive or crazy person who wants to come after me, or anybody who wants to confirm or deny Mathis's theory. Let's see, my earliest photo on Facebook was posted back in 2007 when I was, 15 years old. Most of my life since then has been like an open book on Facebook. So anyway, yeah, I've been exposed by Mathis with false information in the past, and it's just kind of funny. But regardless of that, I still give the man credit for the good research that he's done. Here's my grandma with me as a little baby, and my mom holding me at the hospital. So there's no question that I'm not connected to these elites. Lobster says you should write a book, Germ. I have a lot of different notes that I would like to eventually compile into a book. I especially want to write a book that I can send to all the friends that I had growing up who I don't really talk to anymore, to explain my worldview and to just hopefully reach out to them and be understood by them and hopefully influence some of them. That's one thing that I want to do, is just have an approachable explanation with some autobiographical details to explain sort of like who I am and how I came to these conclusions. And, because I consider myself a personable guy. I've always been, no matter where I go, I've always been able to make friends. I've always been able to get along with all different kinds of people. I'm not, the profile that they present in the media of the, angry, crazy white man who's just motivated by rage or feelings of alienation or, things like that, that doesn't fit me at all. And I want to sort of communicate that at the same time as giving a reasonable explanation or presentation of my views. So that if I write a book anytime soon, that'll be it. I see in the chat, Didymus had a second child. Congrats, man. Big news. Glad to hear it. You're now in the 2-child club, just like me. And I'll tell you, 2, I think, is the hardest. Anything after 2, I think, can't be much harder than 2. But 2 does get a little tricky. It takes some getting used to. Especially, I don't know how old your first is, but my first is 2.5, and my second is coming up to 11 months now. And because I can't fully trust my 2.5-year-old, there's always, and because my 2.5-year-old now has a strong mind of her own and has the ability to do things like open doors, walk out of the house on her own, put shoes on her own, she's a lot more headstrong and mobile than she ever used to be. So you have to deal with that, and you can't really trust her. You can't really have her help watch the younger one. And then you have the helpless younger one that is constantly in need of attention, and dividing your attention between the two, and there's a whole mess of difficulties that, good Maki, you thank you. You gave me 5 last stream. You can't be the only one to. No more, please. I really appreciate it, though. I can't thank you enough. Good Maki, we like I talked about last time, let's try to set up a Valheim stream or something like that and get a little gaming in. Didymus says, same experience on my end. Yep. My 2.5-year-old's favorite word is no. Yeah, I'm my daughter is really becoming headstrong on everything. It's yeah, it seems like every meal is a battle, every nap time is a battle. Getting her to clean up after herself. If she's in a good mood, it's easier sometimes. There's ways that you can coax her into doing certain things that she doesn't want to do, but man, I love her to death. She's so smart. She says so many just funny things, and you could tell that she's got such a bright mind behind her eyes. She's learning new things every single day. She has such a good memory. Fatherhood is a beautiful thing. So here, let me maybe I could show you a nice picture of my kids. Here's the whole family. Oh, that's a lot younger. That was from a while ago. My daughter doing her impression of a bat. Here's my son, always smiling. He's always smiling at something. Yeah, there's just, no matter what anybody says about the difficulties and challenges of parenthood, it's all worth it, without question. Thank you, Didymus. Newman says, gonna call you up on Shroom someday, crying and apologizing for everything. God, I hope not. Sadfly says, may I find you and measure your skull? Are you going to decapitate me first, or are you just going to measure it while it's still on my shoulders? Oh, Earl says, love that Adidas jacket. Yeah, that's an old, I think it's like a 2008 Germany when they I think they won the cup back then, right? Oh, no, they didn't. So when did Germany win the cup? 2014? Yeah, but that was a Germany soccer team Adidas jacket. Schmuck Puppet says, I'm somewhat new to this channel, so I would like to ask litmus question. Who did 9/11? You know who did 9/11. You know who did 9/11. Our cryptocratic overlords who here, I'll show you a quick picture of them. I'll show you a quick picture of our glorious cryptocratic overlords. Alright, that's my answer. Mossad, the CIA, the Bush administration, Urban Moving Company. Fatty Bacon. I haven't watched your latest video, but are you familiar with E. Michael Jones? He talks about architecture and its decay. Yeah, somebody else mentioned Jones. All right, Schmuck, you've obtained your desired information. Now you have to go report to your Mossad supervisors and tell them to put an extra gang stalking regiment on my tail. What was I reading? Oh yeah, E. Michael Jones. I have heard of him. I didn't know that he was into architectural criticism. A couple other people notified me of that in the comments of that video, and that's interesting. I'll have to look into it. Schmuck says, yeah, I actually work for Ben Bernanke. Hey, make a super chat, bro. You got the money then. My overlord is a hedge fund called Citadel. Hook me up then, bro. Straight to Netanyahu. Alright. Coming up on the 2-hour mark here, gentlemen. Any other questions, comments, concerns? I heard a rumor that Mel Gibson is making a movie on Rothschilds. Well, he is making a movie on, apparently on child abuse and child sex trafficking, I believe. So, indirectly, yes, the Rothschilds. I think that's what I heard, right? Let's see. Oh, it seems like this is a false rumor. Mel Gibson is not making a documentary about child sex trafficking. That's too bad. Would have been interesting. Look at the logo for his production company. Yes. There's a picture of him doing this too. I've seen a picture of him doing that too. Yeah. Good old one-eye symbolism. 13 euro per hour? Aren't euros like down to the value of $1 too now, the US dollar? Hasn't it sort of the gap been closing? So that's not good, man. You can make more than that. Okay. Schmuck, good to meet you. Take care. See you next time. Gibson's dad questioned the Holocaust death toll. Good. Good. But that's not enough. I kind of want to read... I've never read Hoffman's Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare. Kind of want to read that. Maybe I'll do that next and then do a video on that. But, the other thing I wanted to talk about was the recent drama between J.F. Gariepi and Philosophicat. I can't tell you how glad I am to not be involved in that interpersonal drama that seems to happen in certain spheres of the alt-right or the dissident right or that sort of corner of the internet. I had my own disagreements with Philosophicat about a number of issues. And at some point I got blocked by her without warning on Twitter. Never really got any kind of a explanation for that, and I always tried to be as amicable with her as I possibly could, because I knew that other people within these circles liked her, and as much as I, am in some ways an outcast and don't really get the interpersonal involvement, or I don't try to insert myself into those circles, I don't want to be completely rejected by those circles. For example, Millennial Woes. I was invited onto Millennial. I had a good time talking with him on Millennial, but the last few years I just haven't gotten an invite, and I'm sure that there's good reasons for that, but despite having differences with them and a lot of people who are associated with them, I never really wanted to be outcasted explicitly. I always kind of wanted a bridge there. I didn't want to burn the bridge, the proverbial bridge. So I always tried to be as amicable as possible. And I still got the block without any warning or explanation from her. And so when I was listening to JF's recent stream about his conflict with her, a lot of what he said, rang true for me. A lot of things for example, when we were debating astrology, when we had a direct debate, replying to each other directly on Twitter, she was always respectful. There was sort of a tension there, but she was respectful. I was respectful. But then I would see an hour or two later, she'd make a post saying something like, "Oh, those people who deny or criticize astrology, they're just modern people who, they're ignorant of the truth. They don't just painting anybody who denies astrology as a modernist or a materialist atheist who just is too ignorant to understand the true truth of astrology." And so it would be direct conversation, respectful. Suddenly, a moment later, indirectly referring to you or people like you in very disparaging and ad hominem sort of attacks. So when he brought that up, I was like, yeah, I've experienced that too. 3blog says, hey Germ, just wanted to say I'm really sorry about my behavior on Twitter. I didn't realize how uncomfortable I was making everyone, and I'm sorry. Are you am I talking to Johnny right now? It didn't make, if you're Johnny, it didn't make me uncomfortable. It's not a great look. It's not a great look. If if you're hanging out with the homies, if you're a bunch of young men, I understand the impulse to share videos of beautiful women. But that's like a private thing, That's a private thing when you're hanging with the homies, or you're just, generally it's like a teenage or a young man kind of a thing to do. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I just don't want to see that shit on my timeline, and I think that the horny posting really shouldn't, be for the public square that Twitter is. So, I didn't take it. Don't take it personally. Don't get too down on yourself for it, and get yourself out there. Try to find a girlfriend. I'm sure you can, dude. You just got to put yourself out there and find a girl that's right for you. Earl Pipe says, I'll admit I've pretended to care about astrology in the past to get with chicks. That's pretty funny. That's not going to it's not going to last long, though. You can't keep up that charade for too long, because it seems like chicks are either they don't care about astrology, or it's their whole fucking life. It's that's all they want to talk about. It's like their entire personality. So it's not a long-term strategy to try to pretend that you're into astrology with an astrology chick. Even though I had no idea what I'd be talking about. Oh yeah, that moon's powerful. That's pretty funny. Caligula asks, hey Germ, do you know the channel Black Build, aka Devon Stack? I think I've come across that channel before. Is it on YouTube? Yeah. I watched his videos years ago. Haven't in a long time. Well, he hasn't made videos in a long time. 2 years ago was his last video. Is he still around on Twitter or anything like that? I don't know. But I remember way back in the day watching some of his videos. Earl also said earlier, the drama and shit talking can be fun, but it should have never intertwined with personal or with political autism that can get one unpersoned. Yeah. And I think that is a problem with women in general getting into political discourse online, because men and women, I think in general, react to harsh criticism of an intellectual variety differently in general. As JF discussed in his stream, which I would recommend you checking out, he said it better than I could. There is an element of female psychology that is always concerned with how another person feels, how another person perceives you. And it's very rare for there to be a woman who can take harsh criticism about their ideas without internalizing it personally. And, that's something I'm aware of. It's something I always tried to take into consideration when having a debate or when critiquing Philosophicat's ideas. Even before I sent her a DM before I went out and made my astrology video, my astrology live stream critiquing it. I sent her a DM saying basically like, look, don't take this personally. I know we've had debates in the past. I know that we've, had our differences, but I really don't have anything. I don't have anything against you personally. So please don't take it personally. And she never responded to that. But yeah, I think that's a general difference between male and female psychology. Like I said, JF explained it really well. I'd recommend checking out his channel. But that is, in general, why women getting involved in political discourse is often a recipe for drama and issues. Yeah, JF is pretty much exclusively on Odyssey now. And look, this is another element of female psychology. Me even just saying this about female psychology, I guarantee if there are women out there who consider themselves political commentators or philosophers or whatever, would hear me say this and take it personally and get like emotionally upset about it. But I think anybody who looks at male versus female psychology in an objective way would agree with me. And to take it a step further, if those female political commentators hear that, I think that one thing that they'll react with is the idea that there is no such thing as female or male psychology. We both have the capacity to think objectively. We both have the capacity to think intelligently. And while that is true on some level, that reaction, that refusal to recognize the uniquely feminine psychological perspective and proneness to emotionality and taking things personally, that is basically like how feminism can creep into even a space such as ours. Didymus says Ed Dutton took over all of JF's old YouTube audience. I should watch more Ed Dutton. There's, I'm sure that there's things I disagree with him on. I think I've, back when I was following Thomas Bodden Rees's channel, when he had a channel, I think I saw he made some good critiques of Dutton. But at the same time, Dutton is very entertaining, and he has a lot of interesting sort of novelty takes on things that I enjoy. Is Emily Yukis the most based female on the dissident right? Is she the one who drew cartoons? She had some kind of cartoon show. I never really followed her. Earl says Thomas Bodden Rees was the best, man. He was very entertaining. And he had some good takes, and I watched. Anytime I saw a video of his come out, I'd watch it. I miss his content. Wonder what happened to him. Anyway, all right, it's past midnight here. My God, I need to go to sleep. It's been good hanging with you guys. Had a good time, and like I said earlier, I want to do these more regularly. I'm trying to be more regular. The thing that always caught me up before was the idea that I don't have a presentation perfectly down, and I need to just get over that. I need to stop letting perfect be the enemy of good, and just do it because it's fun and it's good practice for talking and sharing ideas. And I feel like it feels like, I used to be an athlete and then I let myself go. And as with any good skill, talking about ideas, sharing stories, giving theories on things, reacting to the audience, all that is a skill. It's like a muscle that you have to constantly be flexing, constantly be using to improve. And I want to get back into the habit of that. So everybody have a good night, and hope I'll be seeing you guys again soon. Take care.